Hi, welcome back to Focal Point AAFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. I want to get back to the Martin Luther King business here just in a quick second. Here's that story that I was telling you about from PowerlineBlog.com. Satellite temperature data flat for over 16 years. They got a graph here, and you can see that the trend is toward global cooling. Now, the UN is getting ready to release its latest global warming hysteria report. So I want you to have this information so you can debunk that when it comes out. Been flat for 16 years and 8 months. Now, I got a kick out of this. I mean, John McCain he aggravates me, but he just kind of cracks me up. I'm looking at a story here of his town hall meeting last night with Jeff Flake in Arizona. They have a town hall meeting, but out in front there's an armed guard. There is a sign, private event by invitation only. And it's John McCain in there with Jeff Flake talking about how we've got to have open borders. We got to let everybody in that wants to come in. So they've got an armed guard at the border to their town hall, but they don't want any restrictions whatsoever on our border with Mexico. And then John McCain's in there in this private event, invitation only, cannot get in unless you're invited. You can't get in here unless you get permission. You got John McCain in there saying that a pathway to citizenship must be a fundamental principle of any immigration bill. Any immigration bill we've got, it's got to have amnesty in it. It's going to be a non-starter if it doesn't. Got to have it. Got to have a pathway. Well, and I say to John McCain, well, how about a pathway to your own town hall? How about providing a pathway to that for openers? But, that's the sign that ought to be on our southern border, isn't it? By invitation only. That sign, that we ought to put that sign, take it right off of the John McCain town hall meeting and plaster that along the entire length of that 2,000-mile double-layer security fence along our southern border by invitation only, signed John McCain. Now, I want to get back to Martin Luther King, and I got a bombshell to drop on you here in a second. I sent out a tweet to this effect, and it's already lighting up the Twitter sphere, so hang tight because I'm going to give you a revelation. I did not know this until an hour ago, so I'm going to give you information that's just brand new to me. But here is some excerpts. This is CNSnews.com talking about the bus boycott that Martin Luther King Jr. led starting in 1955, 4 days after Rosa Parks. She was taken to jail. I mean, she was arrested because she wouldn't go to the back of the bus and give her seat to a white man. So they have this bus boycott. They have the meetings to organize this and promote it in churches. He's speaking from the pulpit. So again, it's just ludicrous. It's just absurd. These people, these ACU people say that you got to separate religion and politics. You got to keep politics out of the pulpit. You can't get the church involved in politics. It's just not right. It's unconstitutional. I say go tell Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Go tell him that. Go tell the blacks who have the civil rights today that were denied them prior to his life and work. Go and tell them that the church has no business being involved in politics. That's just stupid. Ladies and gentlemen, it's just historically ignorant. It is historically stupid for people to say that the church should not be involved in politics. You got one response to that, Martin Luther King Jr. That's my response to that gibberish, that bilge that the church and pastors and preachers should not be involved in politics. I give you the civil rights movement. I give you Martin Luther King Jr. I don't want to hear about it anymore. It's bilge. And we don't need to put up with that kind of nonsense any longer. But here is a column about the sermon that he delivered at Holt Baptist Church at the end of the first day of this boycott. And what Dr. King stressed is that the boycott movement's foundation was the Christian religion. Now, you're not going to hear this from a lot of people that talk about Martin Luther King Jr. On Monday, we played some excerpts from his I Have a Dream speech, and we walked through how he was quoting from Amos and from Isaiah. He was quoting from the Old Testament prophets to make his case for the liberation and the freedom and the full emancipation of black people in America. And he stressed here in 1955, December 5, I want it to be, whatever we do, he said, listen to this, whatever we do, we must keep God in the forefront. That's Martin Luther King Jr. Whatever we do, we must keep God in the forefront. Again, a quote, I want it to be known throughout Montgomery and throughout this nation that we are a Christian people. We believe in the Christian religion. We believe in the teachings of Jesus. The only weapon that we have in our hands this evening is the weapon of protest. That's all. And listen to this. He expressed his conviction. You know, when I talk about this, when I pray this back to God in our opening segment, I just get lacerated by people on the left for expressing the conviction that God will judge nations based on whether they obey him or not. And they just hammer me for that. Well, here is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He's also the God, this is quoting him now, he's also the God that stands up before the nations and said, be still and know that I'm God, that if you don't obey me, I will break the backbone of your power and slap you out of the orbits of your international and national relationships. So, hey, anybody says, hey, all this stuff, all this theocratic nonsense about God's judging nations that don't obey him, say, hey, I'm just quoting Martin Luther King Jr. You got a problem with that, take it up with him. Take it up with the civil rights leaders. Take it up with Martin Luther King Jr. because that's what he taught and that's what he believed. And then Martin Luther King Jr. talked about one of the glories of America. And this is an important thing to understand, that even in the midst of that darkness where people were denied a seat at a lunch counter, they were denied access to a water fountain, they were denied access to the front half of the bus purely because of the color of their skin. Even in the middle of that, Dr. King saw that there was something great about the United States of America, and the capacity that they had to protest was an evidence of the greatness of this country. Certainly, he says, certainly this is the glory of America with all of its faults. So he doesn't gloss over the fact that America has faults, and we know America has faults today. We're tolerating abortion. We are celebrating a perversion, celebrating homosexuality. So America has a lot of faults, and Dr. King didn't gloss over that. But this, he says, is the glory of our democracy. If we were incarcerated behind the iron curtains of a communistic nation, we couldn't do this. If we were dropped in the dungeon of a totalitarian regime, we couldn't do this. Think of the pastor, our Christian pastor over in Iran, sentenced to 8 years in prison there for doing nothing more than trying to help people in the name of Christ in the country of Iran. He was denied an appeal yesterday. He's going to rot in that prison, as far as we know, for another 6.5, 7 years, and our government's doing absolutely nothing about it. You know why? Because he's a Christian. They don't care about Christian victims of persecution, prosecution, intimidation, and bullying. But this is what Dr. King says. Look, if we were dropped in the dungeon of a totalitarian regime, we couldn't do this. But the great glory of American democracy is the right to protest for what is right. And he talks about the fact that he was happy that if anybody had to get taken to jail for taking a stand for equality in treatment, that it was a Christian. Mrs. Rosa Parks was a strong Christian lady. He says, if it had to happen to somebody, I'm glad it happened to her. He says, since it had to happen, and he knew it had to happen for the movement to go forward, somebody had to be willing to step up and take the risk, be willing to suffer the cost of incarceration for doing what is right. Since it had to happen, Dr. King said, I'm happy that it happened to a person like Mrs. Parks, for nobody can doubt the boundless outreach of her integrity. Nobody can doubt the height of her character. Nobody can doubt the depth of her Christian commitment and devotion to the teachings of Jesus. You know, it'd be one thing, I think what Martin Luther King's saying is, look, it'd be different if you had some kind of hoodlum that was doing this. You had a hoodlum that said, I'm not going to the back of the bus, and it's a hoodlum, a gangbanger, that gets arrested and incarcerated. That would be a different deal. But he says, Mrs. Rosa Parks, devout Christian, there isn't a soul on planet Earth that can doubt her integrity or her character or her devotion to the teachings of Jesus. And I'm happy, since it had to happen, it happened to a person that nobody can call a disturbing factor in the community. Mrs. Parks is a fine Christian person, unassuming, and yet there is integrity and character there, and just because she refused to get up, she was arrested. Now, here's the thing that's going to knock your socks off. Let me get to it. I've got more on this, but here's kind of the bombshell that a lot of people aren't aware of. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Republican. I repeat, Martin Luther King Jr. was a Republican. I'm looking here at a piece from Human Events, actually from 2006. I'll just read a couple of paragraphs here. Number to call, by the way, 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840 if you want to enter the conversation. It should come as no surprise, writes Human Events, that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Republican. In that era, almost all black Americans were Republicans. Why? From its founding in 1854 as the anti-slavery party until today, the Republican Party has championed freedom and civil rights for blacks, and as one pundit so succinctly stated, the Democrat Party, as it always has been, is the party of the 4 S's: slavery, secession, segregation, and now socialism. It was the Democrats who fought to keep blacks in slavery and passed the discriminatory black codes and Jim Crow laws. The Democrats started the Ku Klux Klan to lynch and terrorize blacks. The Democrats fought to prevent the passage of every civil rights law, beginning with the civil rights laws of the 1860s and continuing with the civil rights laws of the 1950s and 1960s. During the civil rights era of the 1960s, Dr. King was fighting the Democrats who stood in the schoolhouse doors. Bull Connor turned fire hoses on black kids, black children. He was a Democrat. It was Dr. King fighting Democrats who turned skin-burning fire hoses on blacks and let loose vicious dogs. It was Republican President Dwight Eisenhower who pushed to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1957 and so forth. Remember, when we come back, stay with us.